We're going to have a discussion section now until lunch at 12:30. And we are joined by this morning's speakers and Andrew Armstrong, the city archaeologist, who is the fount of all knowledge, and hopefully we'll be able to ask any questions relating to the recorded deliveries. I'll kick off with the questions, if I may. Start with easy ones. We've had questions to both Paolo and Amy regarding where and when people might be able to get hold of your full reports. So, Amy, do you want to start us on that one?
I think my first answer is I don't know. I know the full report has just been written as grey literature, but I couldn't actually tell you the next stage because that final approval on the grey literature has only just happened.
I can.
Good, good.
So there is a full grey literature report available from the Historic Environment Record. So if anyone does want that, and I saw in the questions and answers that someone would, please do contact me. And I will be able to send you a copy. That is in the public domain. We're also in the process of working on an article about the results of that whole investigation, that very interesting investigation, which will be available in the local archaeological journal Glovensis at some point in the next year or so, I hope.
Okay, Paolo, do you have anything about your report, please?
Yeah, all I can say is that basically we are still working on the post-excavation assessment. We are still editing the drafts. Finds report and specialist reports are still coming in. So we're still, let's say, early to mid stages. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, so the assessment hasn't been issued yet.
So presumably there will be a full report in a year or two. And Are you intending to do something in the transactions of the Bristol and Gloucestershire?
Yeah, presumably following the post-ex assessment would be possible. But yeah, Andrew, if you know that.
I would have thought so. Yes, I would expect publication in transactions for that one. Paolo, it was rather good. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, as we've got Paolo on, shall I rattle off a couple of the questions that people have asked about your site, Paolo? Paul Sharaski asked whether there was any evidence for secondary use in the limekiln area, given that the structure seemed to be respected by all the later phases.
Yeah, I saw the
from
question.
Environmental samples.
Yeah, I saw the question. We do have samples, but we also have evidence of quite deep truncation, especially affecting that wall that seems to go into the circle or the plan of the kiln, which suggests that if any of the deposits were related to the activity associated with the wall were still there, there is very limited chance that they were actually still existing because of the later truncation. One thing I would say, obviously, we don't have, as I said earlier, we don't have a direct evidence that the wall was associated with the kiln, but I somehow doubt that there was a later activity that included addition of the wall, simply because we got all these deposits of collapsed material from the kiln structure that include the wall. That's why I suspect that if there was a secondary use, there wouldn't be, the collapse would have been cleared, at least in my mind. It's just an hypothesis. I don't have any strong evidence. But so the short answer is no evidence for other use.
Unfortunately, this is weather world. There was another question about the Horsbear Brook and the odd angles to it. I mean, it wasn't clear just from the map. Might be something related to the Roman activity, or even as late as having been moved when the A417 was driven through.
Yeah, as far as I understood, it was rerouted when they were building the A40, and that is what caused the right angle. Sorry, Andrew, did I interrupt?
Yeah, that's correct, Paolo. It's a fairly recent bit of engineering, that strange angle in the Horsbear Brook. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking about 1970.
Recent for our interest. Right. Okay, that's fine. I had one question myself, which was, how close was the dating of the lime kiln itself?
Yeah, it's basically based on the period 3 ditches that truncated it, as in predates this second mid-Roman period, which is 3rd to 4th century. But we haven't got any solid dating from the only few bits of pottery, I'm afraid. But
So not enough to tie it into any specific building campaign in Gloucester or Pucklecote Villa or anywhere else, really, by the sounds of things.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the closest association is with these remains of high status building suggested by Rose.
Yep. I mean, it's certainly not like your average Gloucestershire Roman rural site, is it? So. Okay, thank you for that, Paolo. I've got a quick question to Andrew on Peter's talk about Grange Road, which was the late Saxon activity. It's, again, in my experience in the county, it's extremely rare to find late Saxon material, presumably because it's under medieval settlements, most of it. But is there much more evidence of activity of this period on the outskirts of Gloucester?
Not really is the unfortunate answer. I mean, so much of the wider area of Gloucester was developed in the 50s and 60s, big housing estates that spread out throughout the wider district, and there was very little archaeological work done on those. What I keep wondering about the Grange Road site is what we might have found to the north of Grange Road, opposite the site, if there'd been archaeological work there, because that was the site of the later farm. And what we seem to be finding suggests that there's a settlement nearby, but it isn't really settlement activity itself. So I do wonder if there's more late Saxon material across the road, but it's now been destroyed, sadly. Yes. But no, you're right, it's uncommon, and it was very pleasing to find.
Yeah, we seem to find more early Saxon than late Saxon, which is counterintuitive, really, isn't it? Okay, thank you for that. Amy, we've had a couple of questions for you. First one from Malcolm was, do we have a good date for the peg leg?
We don't. We know that he's in the lay cemetery, so we know that he's medieval to post-medieval, but he's not interacting with anything that we can date. And we haven't C14 dated him. We only C14 dated the Anglo-Saxon skeleton. In terms of prosthetic legs, there is no chronology for them. They're not like coins, so we can't do a typology on the prosthetic leg and date it that way either.
There's a PhD for you, Amy, there, surely.
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, most of the bodies in the Lay Cemetery, we're assuming 17th, 18th, 19th century at that level, but as Amy says, we can't date them.
Too late, isn't it, for common dating?
Yeah, and because also we are only going in many cases 50 centimeters tops below ground level there, we're literally skimming the top of a cemetery which probably continues down for another couple of meters, or certainly another meter. So we're assuming we're finding the later burials, but it's very hard to prove.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I presumed if you'd had any named individuals, you would have mentioned it, but
yeah, there's no relationship between the ledger stones and the burials beneath them. And although we had breastplates on some of the coffins, none of them are named. We've got the initials, but we can't connect that to names, and none of them have, detailed names as to the person in there. So there's no named individuals.
Okay. On a similar line, did you manage to identify any of these jetons to particular businesses?
We didn't know. I believe one of them is French, but I think that's as far as the identification of jetons goes.
Because they can sometimes be related to the local inns, can't they? Which is of great interest to a lot of people. But
yeah,
but no examples there. Okay. There was a specific question from Richard Auckland about a recorded 17th century cross somewhere in the churchyard. Did you find any evidence for that?
No, we know of the documentary evidence of that. We've not found, the whole of it, or the stone that it related to, or even the wooden post at all. No, we didn't find the evidence of that.
Okay, well, thank you.
I think it's worth noting that parts of the graveyard did get landscaped down in at some point in the last 200 years. So it's hard to know what the original ground level would have been. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. On Keith's talk, Andy, I can't ask you to summarise the amount of work that's gone on in the castle over the last few years, because that would be a whole day session, wouldn't it? Is it worth you giving an update on where we're at and what any future work might be planned in the castle site?
Yeah, by all means. The former prison site at Gloucester has a planning permission in place for the residential redevelopment of the site. So that's the reuse of all the listed buildings and the demolition of the non-listed buildings. We have a sequence of archaeology there, which, as Keith said, basically includes the Roman waterfront and then a medieval castle. The keep of the medieval castle survives in very good condition, and that will be preserved as part of any development going forward, although there will be a lot of archaeological fieldwork required in the surrounding area. So if and when that development goes ahead, there will be a need for archaeologists to monitor groundworks, monitor the installation of services, flood attenuation, all the kind of holes that you need below a new development. So it will be a really interesting opportunity to find out more both about the medieval castle and the Roman waterfront. So I hope it happens soon.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Well, we should all say thanks to Andrew for the amount of work he's managed to generate in Gloucester in the last few years. It's huge amounts.
In a busy time.
Fairly long quiet period with not a huge amount of development in Gloucester, and of course there's a lot more to come still, isn't there? So
there is, yeah.
We could have included a number of other sites, I think it's fair to say. I think I've gone through all the questions that have been put in the Q&A. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has any other points or questions they want to raise with their colleagues.
There was one question here about, are there any datable land surfaces in the cathedral green? What I would say is we didn't find any in the area of land to the south of the cathedral. That we were in cemetery soils there, and we couldn't identify any land surfaces. But the contractors on the site to the west of the cathedral did machine a little bit deeper than they were meant to, and this happens on building sites. It's not intentional, it's just the way things sometimes happen. And they did expose quite a lot of medieval archaeology, which was then preserved in situ. So that certainly showed that medieval archaeological remains survive pretty well intact and at a surprisingly shallow depth to the west of the cathedral itself. And there were surfaces there and the remains of things that look like buildings as well. So we found it, but we didn't touch it because we were leaving it alone.
Okay, I mean, there's a question coming from Michael Hare. Is that sort of what you were answering, Andrew? Regarding
Matt, I was answering the question from Matt. Okay. 1218.
Okay, I do apologise. I missed that one. Well, there's a further question for Amy then, which is you were assuming that the west wall of the Saxon church was also the west wall, it was in the same location as the Norman west wall. Is that just an assumption, or have we got any further evidence on that?
Well, we know it's a wall essentially. So it's a Anglo-Saxon wall. So it's related to the Saxon Minster. Whether it's actually the west wall of the Saxon Minster, we don't know, and we cannot know, but it's related to the Saxon Minster.
I would say we've got Caroline's talk this afternoon, who will go into that in far more detail. So we should let her resolve that, I think, if that seems like the way to go, Toby.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. Unless anybody's got any further questions, we've got a couple of minutes, but I'm sure everybody will be quite happy to go and have the sandwiches 2 minutes early. Shall we call that done for this morning? I'd like to thank all this morning's speakers, present and not present, yet again, and also thank you to Kaz and Martin for organising the system, which has all worked. As we probably all know, it doesn't necessarily always happen. So thanks to Cotswold Archaeology as well. And we'll call a halt there. Back at 1 o'clock with Andrew as chair. Thanks all very much.